am so thankful that Beth Lake sat down and talked with me for this week's episode of the Backstage Creative. We get into all sorts of great topics like deciding which projects to commit to, some of her favorite aspects of being an associate sound designer, and also some of the challenges of that role, and what it's like being a woman sound designer in a field that's very male dominated. Welcome to the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. I'm so glad that you're here. On this podcast, I interview people who work behind the scenes of theater. I really enjoy sitting down and having conversations with stage managers, designers, choreographers, music directors, musicians, technical directors, sound engineers. There is so much that we can all learn from people who work in a different field than us. Myself, I'm a musician, but I learned so much about being an artist and about making it in the theater industry from the conversations that I have with the people on the show. Like I said, today's my conversation with Beth Lake. Beth is a sound designer based in New York City. Beth has worked on some really great shows that have gone to Broadway and off Broadway, and she's done a lot of work in the regional space as well. And so it was such a privilege to have a conversation with her. I also feel lucky because so I do all of my own editing, and so then when I edit, I get to listen to it again, and so that's fun to pick out different things that I didn't maybe catch the first time through, or like during the conversation, to be able to listen back and get more out of the conversation than what I got originally. And that also helps because I don't really like editing. So that helps to give perspective of, okay, this, I get to listen to it again, and I get to learn even more from listening to it a second time. So again, I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for everyone who sits down and talks with me. It can be intimidating to be interviewed for a podcast. I think I've been interviewed for maybe 2 or 3 podcasts, and it was terrifying. I think it's way scarier to be interviewed than to be the interviewer. And so I applaud people's courage to sit down and talk about themselves and talk about art. Those two things can be difficult sometimes to put into words, and it can be intimidating to be interviewed. So thank you to Beth and to all the other people that I've interviewed for being brave and being willing to step out of the background and kind of have the spotlight shining on you. I would imagine that the most of us, if not all of us, who work behind the scenes of theater aren't really spotlight type people. For the most part, I would say we probably enjoy being in the shadows and being behind the scenes. I know I certainly do. Every once in a while, though, it is nice to step into the light and to get some attention. And so I hope that this podcast can be a way that fills that need and helps people feel seen in the work that they do, the important work that they do in the art world. Here we go. Here's my conversation with Beth Lake. Awesome. So have you been involved in any virtual digital productions over the past year?
Yeah, a little bit here and there. I was fortunate enough to have a little bit of podcasting work before the pandemic, and so that kind of carried me through for a little bit, and then that kind of got me some experience. So a couple of theaters have asked me to do, honestly, kind of what you're doing. It's just like being on the recording side of things. So I got to do that a little bit in the fall and through the winter. So that was I did a couple projects for the public as I did the ancillary episodes to 2 of their plays. So I did the talk back type sessions, and it was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy doing more podcast and talking type stuff as opposed to doing music and sound effects?
Well, it kind of, in post-production world, yes. In theater world, I do primarily plays, so sound effects and music. But in podcasting world, I would so much rather be the person editing an interview down and adding any scoring or music to that than doing the Foley play thing. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. When all of this, when the world shut down, I had a couple projects that were in the works that shifted to being podcast plays, and I very quickly realized that wasn't what I wanted to do, and so I actually backed out of a couple things just as a this isn't what I was hired to do. It's not what I'm comfortable with. I don't think that I'm the right person for this job. I still have a lot of feelings about it, but um, I've really enjoyed being able to do like the more scripted podcast or interview things. So a little less of the like Foley play type things.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything upcoming?
Sort of. I don't know how much I can talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I primarily work for one podcast, and I've been doing a lot of like archival stuff for them. I don't know how much I can say, so I'm not gonna say too much. But and I'm in talks to do a couple in person plays, which is crazy to think about after all this time. Literally, like the last week has just been, oh hey, we're doing this. Are you free? Oh hey, are we doing this? Are you free? So it's been kind of a whirlwind of um, trying to figure out a schedule for the summer and fall, um, and getting back to real performances is kind of crazy to think about. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I one of the good things that's happened, like at least for me during the pandemic, is like scheduling podcast interviews has been so easy. Like back when I started, like in 2018 and 2019, it was just like this constant back and forth. I mean, email after email after email of trying to find times to interview people, and you catch someone right as they're going into tech week, or but then the pandemic, I was like, hey, can you meet tomorrow? Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, I have to apologize for waiting so long to get back to you, but it was so nice to just like turn my computer off and not come back to my computer for over a week. It was great. So
yeah.
sorry for my delay in getting back to you about all the things, but
No, like, oh, that's awesome. I think it's great that you did that. I think we need to do that more.
it was so great. And like, I think if there's anything that I've learned in the last year and a half, it's been you do actually have to take a vacation, and it needs to be a real vacation. It can't be a, oh, I'll just answer emails. It's like, no, just don't bring your computer. That's it. Like, if you can't do it, you can't do it, and just say no. So that is, I think, my big takeaway from all of this is just say no and take a break.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, hopefully there'll be some the things that we've all learned during this time, like maybe how to rest better, that we'll be able to take into, as the pandemic is like hopefully kind of winding down. We can take some of these things we've learned into the next stage of art and theater.
God, I hope so. I sure hope so.
Mm-hmm. Has there been anything that you've felt like you've maybe learned during the last year, or either like in relation to your art or your design, or any big like life lesson that the pandemic has taught you?
I don't know. It's so hard because I feel like we haven't gotten back to that sense of quote unquote normal, that it's kind of hard to like have the like I don't have a point of reference, in that like we have the before times and we had the like new normal, and we still haven't gotten back to like even closer to the old normal. So it's hard to like have that frame of reference, so to speak. I feel like the big takeaway, this isn't even just pandemic related, but like in the last few years for me has been like, you can say no to things, and you don't have to say yes to every single project. um, and that has been, I think, freeing and also terrifying, of like understanding that I'm actually better off if I say no to a couple things and fully dedicate myself to the things that I do say yes to, as opposed to trying to do 125% on five things at once. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that is more just like being older and being more established and having the ability to say no to things, um, more than pandemic related, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. How do you decide what to say yes and no to? Do you have like kind of like a checklist in your mind, or yeah, how do you decide?
It's kind of a gut check more than anything. It's more of a like, have a conversation with the people involved, see if there's like a rapport, and like it honestly comes down to sometimes just like, would I be willing to go and have dinner with this person 6 nights a week? Are we going to be able to communicate well and understand each other and not get angry or frustrated? Are we going to be able to like enjoy ourselves? Is there something outside of the work that we have in common to be able to like touch base on and like have a different thing to talk about? um So that kind of plays into it. And then honestly, I run the metrics, and I do the like, I'm not available for this day, I'm available for this day, and if I do this many days and I'm only getting paid this, I'm not going to be happy with myself, because I will know that I will be stressed about rent. And like, I do run the numbers, and that's usually the way that, like, when I come onto a project, that's usually what happens first. Is there's like the initial conversation, and then there's kind of the offer and the like run the numbers, and then kind of go into the gut check of like, all right, well, I can make this work financially and physically. Do I want to do it? Is there another like, is there something about the project that speaks to me? Is there something about the people that speaks to me? And that's kind of usually the order of operations. And sometimes there are the shows that I don't really want to do, but I know that they're going to pay really well, or it's going to be very quick, and I have an opening in my schedule and I can do it. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
What have you learned about like asking for more money or more time, like negotiating, in those early conversations, and you have maybe some hesitations about the pay or the hours, or you have to fly a long way to get there. Have you learned anything about like how to negotiate successfully to make your life easier and kind of get what you want?
Yeah, I mean, primarily my work these days is as an associate designer. So there's a little bit more, I feel a little bit more empowered to ask for more as opposed to as a designer, which feels kind of weird and backwards. But it also seems like there's a little bit more of an established pay scale, especially on some of the larger shows that I'm working on, like on Broadway and some of the off Broadway projects. And not so much regionally, but primarily on Broadway and off. There's a little bit more of a like, no, this, like, this is the job, this is how much it should pay, this is what I'm worth. As opposed to as a designer, it's kind of harder to make those arguments sometimes. And as a designer, honestly, I just in the last year, 2 years, I've started working with an agent, and she's very much my like back and forth of like, do I really want to do this? I think that there's this, and she is the person who will talk to me and be like, okay, what is good about this, what is bad about this, and she's very much the like make the pros and cons list, especially in terms of like design projects. But as an associate, always ask for more. That is the my kind of bottom line is, you can ask for more. The minimum is the minimum. It is not the maximum. And I'm a little bit fearful coming back that a lot of the offers we're going to be getting are the minimum is the maximum. It really comes down to like running the numbers, like how much are you getting paid on a day, how many hours in that day, can you live on that, are you going to be happy living on that. But in terms of negotiation strategy, always ask for more, because there's always going to be somebody asking for more. So, and I think that especially plays into being a woman in this industry and being a woman in my job as an associate sound designer, where there are very few of us. um, Frankly, there's always a mediocre white man who's willing to do the job, and he'll get paid more because he'll ask for more. So it's kind of a confidence thing of saying, I'm worth this, and you want me to do the job? Great, I want to do the job, but you have to pay me what I'm worth. So,
Yeah, I think so many times people don't want to come across as like arrogant or needy or a lot of work, but there's also something to be said about believing in yourself and knowing that you bring experience and knowledge and yeah.
yeah, and I mean, it's a two-sided coin in that, like, if you say that you bring that, you have to bring that,
Hmm.
and you have to be willing to do the job, and be willing to actually put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. Of just like, okay, you hired me to do this, I'm going to do it, I'm going to get it done. Frankly, that's something that I sometimes struggle with. Is like, all right, I really don't want to go to a 16-hour day of tech and da 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 da, but I said I'm going to do it, so I got to do it. And then you show up and you sit around for 4 hours or whatever, and it's like, oh, I could have been sleeping, or whatever it is. That is the hard part, more than anything. Is like, well, you said you're going to do it, so you got to do it.
Hmm. As a pit musician, I've sat around for many hours during tech week and thought about all the things I could be doing, but
Yeah, yeah,
that's part of it.
it's just part of the job.
Yep. So I first heard about you from the Women Making Sound Waves, Reflections on Six Leading Women and the Sound Design.
Yeah.
So yeah, how does it feel to be one of the six leading women in sound design?
It's kind of crazy. I mean, I was on it, my peers, I think, are the best part of that. Is like, because it was with Joanna and Jessica and Toy and Palmer, and I'm trying to think of who the other people were, and now I feel like a jerk for not remembering. But yeah, it was great. It was kind of crazy to think about that and be like, really, that's me? What? I just make shows happen. Oh, it was Jane, I bet. I think it was Jane.
Jane
Yes.
Shaw. Mm-hmm.
Yes, because Jane, Jessica, and Joanna are the ones that always like
Oh yeah.
the J names. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So I was just rereading the article before we hopped on, and you talked about that you enjoy being an associate. So what do you enjoy about that role?
My favorite thing about being an associate is kind of being the man behind the curtain, so to speak, of just like, yeah, go look at that thing. We're just gonna make it work over here. Like, you want that big, awesome, amazing thing? Cool, we can do that. Let me just go over here behind the curtain and make it happen, and then we'll be like, see, look at this amazing thing we did. So I love being able to do that and being able to like say yes to everything and figuring out how to make that happen. I love being able to be in the room with a whole bunch of incredibly smart, talented, creative people and see how they all think and taking little bits and pieces of their various methods and strategies and kind of integrating them into my own. Um, and so it allows me to like be an observer and see how other people work and be like, oh, that's why that's so successful. All right, how can I do that in my process? How can I make this better for them? How can I make this better for myself too? Especially as an associate sound designer, because sound designers, I feel like the sheer amount of duties of the sound designer is so much wider than the other disciplines. Like scenic designers all have the same like, okay, yeah, we all have like kind of the same process, but like read the play, see what you need, da 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 da. Sound designers or lighting designers are the same way. It's like your job is to make sure the show is lit. Sound designers, you have to write music, or you have to find music, or you have to find sound effects, or you have to find musicians, or you have to find microphones, or you have to find speaker. It's like there's so many different things that sound designers do, that as an associate to be able to kind of mix and match all of those duties and see how different people do it and kind of create my own thing is, I think, the most exciting. So I've worked with a huge swath of designers that all do things very differently. So being able to kind of meander through those different processes to make my own is so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that like mindset of just being open and learning wherever you can. I love that. I love to hear how other people try to do that in the work that they do.
Yeah, and I especially working with various people, like it's fun to be able to walk into a process and be like, okay, I know how Jessica Paz would do this, and I know how Darren West would do this, and I know how Mark Salzberg would do this. So who am I working with? Who's going to do it what way and why? And kind of being able to get ahead of that. But then also when I'm doing my own show, be like, oh, okay, so Jessica brings this to the table and Darren brings that to the table. So I need to do a little bit of both and make my own thing. So it's really fun to be able to learn from so many different people and then like make your own palette, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are maybe some of the challenges of being an associate?
Everybody wants the right answer from you at all times, no matter what. And you can't mess up, um, which is infuriating. Especially when you get to like the big commercial Broadway productions. Like you have a whole team of people, like a whole team of engineers that are looking at you for like, okay, what's the answer? And you're like, wow, I'm gonna figure it out, but look, give me 5 minutes. That's I think the hardest part is not ever being able to say I don't know, or I shouldn't say that. I should say feeling like you can never say I don't know. I think that part of being a good associate is saying I don't know, let me find out, or I don't know, let me look that up. I think that that actually wins you a lot of respect, especially with the crew, because then you're not putting on that face of I know everything and I know it better than you. It's more of a I'm here to collaborate with you and help figure out the best solution. So sometimes you have a big, lofty, creative idea, and there's no good answer for how to make it happen. And so you kind of have to go back to the drawing board and having a team of people that you can say, all right, you think this way, and you think that way, and I think this way. Why don't we all come up with an idea and see where the Venn diagram lays out and how we can make it happen. And I think that's part of being a good associate, is understanding how different people think and what different people bring to the table. It's also the hardest part, is like you kind of have to, if everybody does have a different idea, you have to figure out what is going to be the best one, and sometimes that is not your idea, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think everyone in theater needs to like study psychology at some point, because we're constantly having to go into these rooms and read rooms super quickly, and we have to work with just a huge variety of personalities and people, and I just there's so much like of just reading people and kind of
Yeah.
getting into people's heads, and
Well, and I
yeah.
think especially in sound, because we work in a medium that most folk don't understand, because you can't see it. I feel like we have to do so much more of that, reading the room and reading the understanding, or reading the subtext rather than what's actually being said. There's there's just like another level of thinking that has to happen, because you can have a director who says, "Yeah, I like this, but I don't know why." And I don't like that, but I don't know why. And you have to kind of do that detective work of, okay, the thing that you actually like about this is the drum beat. The thing that you don't like about this is the tempo of it, or you know what I mean? Like you have to kind of do that extra level. It's funny. One of my best friends and collaborators is a director named Catherine Carter, and she works in primarily opera these days. But we started out doing theater together, and oftentimes when I would get stuck on like a transition or a piece of music that I just couldn't quite find the right thing, she would come to the tech table, and I would be like, "All right, this is what we have. Here are three different options," and she'd be like, yes, no, yes. Yes, because of this. No, because of that. Yes, because of this. And it's like, oh, okay. I understand what you're thinking now. And I don't like either of those things that you just said yes to. So I'm going to find something else. But just like having that other person's brain to say, like, yes, this is why, or no, this is why, is really helpful. And I think that's something that we as sound designers just kind of inherently have to do on our own half the time, is figure out the why.
As you've been working as an associate, has there been anything that you like maybe look back on your earliest days of working as an associate that you wish you would have known at the time?
I'm certain that there are. And it honestly, the first things that come to mind is like stupid paperwork, which doesn't really help anybody, because like stupid paperwork looks bad no matter what, especially 5 years ago. It's like, yeah, your paperwork looks terrible. But I'm trying to think of like situational things that is like, oh God, why would you ever do that? So much of being an associate and being an assistant is just learning from your past mistakes, even if it is something as simple as, oh, well, don't put that on the paperwork. Or, yes, you forgot to put this one thing on the paperwork. The like big social thing that I've learned is that you have to talk to people as the assistant and as the associate, because there's going to be a time when the designer isn't in the room and the director turns around and says, "Can you fix this?" And you don't want to be the person who's never actually talked to the director before and never didn't have a rapport to be able to say, like, I can't fix that, but I can make a note of it and I'll ask the designer. So like you have to talk to people. You have to be able to go up to the director on that first day that you're meeting them and be like, "Hi, I'm Beth. I'm so and so's associate. When they're not in the room, you can come to me." And be able to like be a human to them and be a person, as opposed to just a nameless person behind a tech table taking notes. So I think that is the big thing, because I remember doing a show at the Old Globe in San Diego, and I was working with a designer that I had only worked with once before, and a creative team that I hadn't worked with at all. And I was brought onto the show because it was going to be transferring and touring, so it was very much a like, I needed to be the person to take it to multiple places. So I really needed to come in and like organize it, make it work, be able to pick it up and move it. And I didn't know the director at all. And the designer had to go off and record a pre-show announcement, which often happens. And for whatever reason, it was taking forever. I have no idea why, but it took like an hour and a half. And in that time, we were tacking something on stage. And the director just turns to me, and who I've now worked with before, and she's just like, "Can't you just fix this?" And I was just like, "Carrie, I'm sorry. I don't know the show well enough to say yes." I'm like, "I'm sorry. I don't know what the ramifications of changing this from a 10-second thing to a 50-second thing is. I just don't know. I'm so sorry." And this was like kept going and kept going and kept going. And by the end of the hour and a half, or whatever, the designer walks in, and I was like, "Great, you're here!" And he, like, after we figure out the thing and it was fine, he's like, "I've never seen so much fear in your eyes." It's just like, she's yelling at me. And, I've gotten to know Carrie, the director, ever since. And I know that she's not yelling, she's just passionate. But in that moment of like, I met this woman this morning, I don't know. It was like, oh God. So, like, understanding that you have to talk to people, you have to be a person, you have to go out for dinner, you have to go out for, if not to the bar, but at least go out and socialize and become a human to all of them. So, and get to know your other associates. That is a big one too. It's getting to know your other associates, because they're going to be the people designing with you in 5 years.
Yeah, I think I found like people so appreciate when you take the initiative, like when you go up and introduce yourself instead of waiting for them to come to you. Like I get nervous introducing myself to people, and I'm not the only one that gets nervous about that. So if I can go and like, take that initiative, I think people really appreciate that.
They really do. And I feel like we'll see how this changes in post-COVID times, but I feel like often I am hired as the people person for the sound design department, because I love sound people. We're bad at social skills, and especially now after a year and a half, oh boy, it's going to be a rough re-entering into society. But I feel like half the time that's why I'm hired, is because I can go to the stage manager and be like, "Hi, this is the problem. This is what the solution needs to be. Do you have a different solution?" Or I can go to the wardrobe department and say, "Hi, I'm Beth. I'm the associate sound designer. We have this issue. Can you help us?" Whereas not all sound people and musicians have those skills to be able to do that gracefully. So,
Yep.
it's gonna be a rough re-entering into society.
So awkward. So many awkward
So awkward
conversations and pauses and
yeah. It's gonna be great.
Yeah. I think like musicians, we have spent so much time in these tiny little practice rooms that we just miss developmental
Oh, entirely.
socialization.
Well, and I think it also goes back to that idea of like reading the subtext, is that because we communicate in a medium that other people don't see, but it somehow makes sense to our brains, it I feel like there's some disconnect there. And we all understand each other because we all speak the same language. But that doesn't mean that the rest of society does.
Yeah.
Or our visual collaborators, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to bridge that is sometimes a fun challenge.
What have you learned about, working like sound design is the only aural part of, costume set and lighting. What have you learned about how to kind of like code switch or use different jargon or language to communicate with those visual designers?
Part of my strengths in that is that I have done a little bit of everything. And that's like the number one thing that I say to students, is do a little bit of everything so that you can understand what you're asking of other people. So like if I'm working with a lighting designer, I can say something to the effect of, my up count is this and my down count is that. So they can understand like, oh, the lights are fading up in this time and down in this time. And I can say, oh yeah, my sound is fading up at this time and down at this time. Things like that. So just being able to understand like a little bit of that jargon helps. Or like with stage management, I was a stage manager in undergrad, and boy was I terrible at it. But it at least allowed me to understand all of the things going through their brains of, oh, okay, so they're having to prep all of these cues that they have to call, and they're making sure that all these people are in the right place, and they're making sure that all these quick changes happen, and they're making sure that it's like understanding a little bit about what they're thinking in that moment. Or like with wardrobe, understanding that when I say I have this microphone and it needs to fit on this person, where can we put it in their costume? It's not just a, well, it needs to go here and it needs to be in the small of their back and it has to be this big and blah 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 blah. Like, but understanding what you're asking of them, like it's a period costume and it's whatever it is, you at least understand that it's going to be a major hassle for them. So being able to know like the give and takes. So doing a little bit of everything. Because like I went to college and I was a line designer, and then I was a stage manager, and then I became a sound designer. And all throughout that, I did a little bit of scenery and a little bit of costumes and a little bit of this and that. So it's like understanding what your peers are doing is super helpful in that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's one of the goals of this podcast too, is just to help people kind of understand each other better, and just to hear like jargon they use, and what things are challenging for the jobs that they do. Um, I think yeah, that's important to know what other people are doing.
Yeah, and I think especially in sound, and maybe it is the same for other disciplines. I truly don't know, but being able to have done a little bit of work as the technical crew or as the engineers or as the run crew to understand what you're asking of people, so that it's not just like, oh, I say this thing and it happens. But you have to understand, like, oh, okay, yes, you're asking that A2 to switch this mic in this moment, but they're also doing a quick change. They're also doing it, like, so you at least understand what you're asking of your team, I think is crucial to being a good designer. And especially when you get into like Broadway, that is kind of the role of the associate, is being able to take what the designer needs to have happen and work with the team to figure out how to make it happen, so that you can say, yes, we can make that mic swap at this quick change, or no, we can't, we have to wait till the next quick change because so and so, for whatever reason. I think that that's the mark of a really good associate, is understanding what you're asking of your people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned some of your background, but I would love to hear more, like where you're from, where you went to school, if you went to school somewhere, and how you ended up in, working on Broadway.
Yeah. So I grew up in Prescott, Arizona. Prescott, not Prescott, if you ask anybody. And basically, I got into theater because I wasn't really good at anything else. um, I was looking for an elective, and when I went into high school, and it was like, well, I don't want to do scene shop, and I don't want to do band because I can't play an instrument, and I'm not very good at choir, and I don't want to do ceramics. It was, or I don't want to do photography. It was like a whole bunch of things I didn't want to do. So I was like, well, I guess I'll take the drama class. And I very quickly realized that I hate being on stage and that it's absolutely terrifying. So I started doing the backstage side of things, and I started running spot up. And from there, I started stage managing. And then it came time to, it was like suddenly 4 years later. I don't know how, but I was doing it for 4 years. And like when I started applying for colleges, I kind of applied on a whim to the school in Northern Colorado, University of Northern Colorado. I interviewed, and it's kind of a funny story that like I had applied to a bunch of places, and I applied to UNC on a whim, and I interviewed there. I went and I visited, and I loved it. I was like, great, I want to go, but I have to get a scholarship. It's like, that's just the way it is. It was an out of state program. And I never heard back from them. And it was kind of soul crushing, to be honest. And so I accepted another program. Was going to go to ASU. I had a roommate. It was going to be an undeclared. And like 2 weeks before school started, I got an email from the now head of the department, who was like, are you coming to our school or not? And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, yeah, we gave you a full scholarship. What, are you coming? And I was like, nobody ever told me that, because they had a change in admin, and
no.
somehow it fell through the cracks. I remember in high school, I worked at a Joanne Fabrics, which was the best job ever. I loved it. And I remember going to my boss and being like, Sandra, I think this is my 2 weeks notice. And she was like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And I was like, I just got a scholarship and I think I'm going to college in 2 weeks. And she was like, all right, fine. And so actually, hilariously, I drove home that day and I got pulled over for speeding. And the officer looks at me, he's like, did you have a good reason for going, whatever it was? And I was like, I gotta go home and tell my mom I got into college. And he was like, all right, fine. Congratulations. Don't do it again. So yeah, and then I, 2 weeks later, moved to Colorado and started school, and it was great. I got in on a lighting design scholarship, and quickly realized I didn't like lighting design. I did stage management, and quickly realized that that was not my thing. And all throughout, I had been working in the sound shop, and it was great. It was me and two other guys, and we just did all the sound for all of the shows. And we had a couple people in the community that would help out, and I learned a lot from them. And it was just kind of us playing around. And finally, somebody was like, well, why don't you just design this for one of these shows? And I was like, sure, I don't know what I'm doing. And it just kind of went from there. And it was tons of fun. It got to be the point of like junior, senior year of college. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can either move to Chicago or I can go to grad school, because the idea of moving to New York City was like terrifying. I applied to grad schools. UC Irvine was the first one that I was like, oh, these people are humans and they care about me. And I just had a really great rapport with Mike Hooker and Vinny Oliveri, who were the program heads there. And it was like, oh, this is the right fit. And I went and I visited. And from the moment I stepped on campus, I was like, oh, this is great. This is the right place to be. Like, these are the right people for me. And I went to grad school thinking that I would come away with all of these like peers and collaborators and designers and directors that I want to work with, and that ended up not happening at all. I have some very good friends that came out of that, but I haven't really worked with very many of my peers from grad school, because we all went in such different directions, and I ended up getting something completely different out of the grad program than what I expected to going into it, which has been great, but it was just completely different than what I anticipated.
So how'd you end up in the city?
I totaled my car. That's really what happened. I finished my thesis project at UCI, and I was driving back. My mom came and visited, and I was driving back to my apartment, and I got into it was a small fender bender, but it ended up totaling my car because it was old. And at that point, I was like, well, I'm either going to move to New York, where I don't need a car, or I have to buy a new car and live in Los Angeles. And I didn't want to buy a new car. And so I moved to New York. Um, and like I had a few contacts out here, and like it was always kind of an option, but I didn't know that I wanted to work on Broadway. That was never like a big dream of mine. I had entered grad school and kind of exited grad school thinking I'm going to be a designer. I'm going to work all over the country. I'm going to fly from here to there, and I'm going to make art. And then I got to New York and was like, art doesn't pay the bills. So I emailed a few of my colleagues and was like, I need a job. And two things happened. One person said, go work at this theater and hang speakers and run cable. And I was like, great, I can do that. And then another was Darren West, who's a sound designer that I had emailed, was like, cool, I have a show happening. It's happening out of town. Come work for me. And that ended up being a little show called Misery at the Bucks County Playhouse. And 3 years later, it transferred to Broadway, and there we are. Because I happened to do it out of town, he was kind enough to bring me along for the Broadway transfer, and it kind of went all from there.
Yeah, being in the right place at the right time,
Yeah.
and being ready
And
for it.
it's kind of funny. Every maybe 2-3 years, I'll get an email from Darren that is just a forward that is that original email I sent him. And it'll be like, look what I found at the bottom of my inbox. And it's always just like, hi, Darren, my name is Beth Lake. And, we've done a handful of shows since then, and he's very much considered a mentor for me. And his go-to associate is a gentleman named Charles Coase, who's also very much been a mentor of mine. And the two of them really took me under their wing and were like, this is how we do it. And taught me a lot. So
yeah, that's great. We all need people like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What was it about sound, do you think, that, or what is it about sound that has kept you in it for this long of time?
I don't know, to be entirely honest. I don't have a good answer for it. And I don't think that I ever really have had a good answer for it. I think that what has kept me going in my career has been the people more than the art, if that makes sense. It's always been that I want to be in that room with those people and I want to help them tell that story. And it just so happens to be that sound is the way that I make that happen. Um, I will often joke that I am a theater person who does sound rather than a sound person who does theater.
Hmm.
And I think that that actually is a pretty important distinction in that I first come to this as loving theater and loving telling stories and the text. And it just so happens that the language I speak is sound.
Hmm.
So,
I like that.
yeah.
What are some of your favorite types of stories to tell?
I'm going through the mental Rolodex of like my favorite shows and favorite things that I've worked on. And I think that I didn't realize it until this exact moment, but I think that some of my favorite projects all have to do with telling women's stories and telling stories that aren't necessarily represented in the greater pop culture world. My two favorite shows ever. One was a project called The Wolves, and I was lucky enough to be the associate and sort of co-designer, but not really the co-designer, on a couple different versions of it. And that is all about some high school girls sitting around talking about on a soccer team, and that's what they do, and they talk as girls talk, and that just really resonated for me of like, oh yeah, I've lived this experience. I understand how these young women are feeling and communicating and what they're going through, and that to this day is still one of my favorite projects. The another of my favorite projects is a play called A Thousand Splendid Suns, and it's a story of these two women in Afghanistan in the late 80s, early 90s, and basically their story of survival and how they depended on each other to get through some truly horrendous experiences in their lifetime. And I think that those are the types of shows that I love because it's stories about how we get through difficult situations together. And it just so happens that they almost always are centered around women or not men.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, I never really made that connection until literally this moment.
Awesome. I love it.
Yeah. So
Have you ever felt like excluded because you're a woman in the sound world? Either consciously or unconsciously, kept out of a room?
I don't know that it's kept out of a room, but it's not part of the club more than
Mm.
anything. It's the like it's the really subtle things of being on a crew working with people and them all saying, okay, we're going to go to lunch, bye, as opposed to we're going to go to lunch, do you want to come?
Yeah.
You know, it's things like that more than anything. It's not the inherent you can't do this, you're a girl. It's the we're doing this and you're over there more than anything. And I think that that has changed a lot in the last even 5 years, even in the last 2 years. I think that early on, I was a little bit more sensitive to that because I was insecure in my own place in the world, in the room, so to speak. And that has really changed in the last few years. And frankly, a lot of it has been just the people that I'm working with and being open and understanding and being able to say to them and like, hey, I don't understand this thing. Can you help me? Or, hey, I think I know what I'm doing on this, but can you just double check my work? And it's not always a matter of like insecurity or not knowing, but it's more the openness of being able to say, like, I might need help. You know what you're doing. Can you help me? And then when you are able to be that open, then they are as well, and will be more willing to say, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I think you do. Can you help me with this? So it's more of a shift in representing myself in the room of confidence more than anything else,
Hmm.
and being able to say, like, I know what I'm doing, therefore I don't need to feel insecure about other things. And that inherently brings with it that invitation of like, oh, come on with us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What do you think have been some of the things that have helped more women have more prominence in the field, and or maybe and or maybe what going forward can we as an industry do to open the pipeline up a little bit?
I think that it's funny. Or yesterday, the day before, I don't remember. I was listening to your interview with Joanna, And Joanna, I love her. We've known each other for a number of years, and yet hilariously only got to work together for like a week or two,
Oh
and that
man.
was it. In our entire careers, we've never really worked together for more than a week. She said something to the effect of, I think it was Joanna at least, of being able to make mistakes. And I think that that is something that we really need to remember as we shift into this new world that we're reopening, is that everybody can make mistakes. And I feel like that has kind of been the, not downfall, but the thing that makes it so hard for women in sound, is that it feels like because there are so few of us, we can't make any mistakes,
Mhm.
you know. And I think that there needs to be an inherent grace about making mistakes in the industry, and being able to say, okay, well, that wasn't necessarily successful, but that's okay. It, let's move on now and give it another try. Because when it comes down to it, everybody's messed something up. Even if you have a Tony Award, like, even if you've designed 30 shows on Broadway, at some point, you messed something up and you learned from it. And that's how you got to where you are right now. And I have a distinct fear for the next generation of women in sound that are going to be pushed to the forefront and very much elevated to the position that they deserve without any form of understanding that it's their first time in that role.
Mm.
And any form of grace is the only word I can come up with, of like understanding that mistakes happen. If we're not supporting the people that we have elevated truly, then there's no point in that elevation. That, I think, is the downfall of why there are so few women in sound. Is that we just, people forget that we can make mistakes and don't forgive mistakes.
So are you saying like you feel like women are just held at a different standard? Is that what
Yeah,
you're getting to?
exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a much more eloquent, less rambly way to say it. Yeah, I mean, like, women are held to a different standard because we aren't allowed to make those mistakes because there are so few of us. And then somebody will say, "Oh yeah, she's the one who messed up that thing. Never going to hire her because she messed up that one thing." It's like, well, so what? You messed that one thing up 20 years ago. You didn't know any better. Now she does. Great. Moving on.
Mhm.
You know, it's that more than anything.
Yeah. I was talking to someone, I can't remember who now, but she was a designer and she was saying, I just wish I could be like mediocre at my job and not feel like I have to represent
Yeah.
every other woman in the field.
Yes, exactly. It's exactly that. I just, it's so hard to feel like, oh, I am the one representing this entire genre of person.
Mhm.
What happens when I mess it up?
Yeah. That's a
You
lot of
know,
pressure.
it's a
Mhm.
lot of pressure, and especially now, like that was, the pressure was there already, and now with everything reopening and everything coming back, and this huge influx of shows and events and this, that, and everything, it's like that pressure feels so much more to be like, oh, there are 5 of us or 6 of us, and now we have to make it look good for everybody else.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's what I mean, like, with the understanding and grace of like, you have to know that we're all struggling coming back from this. Mistakes are going to be made. So what? Fix it
Mhm.
and move on.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's my theory about why there's so few like female professional musicians at the highest levels, like the most well-paid orchestras, Broadway. It's that it's not that they aren't as good, it's that one, they aren't given as many opportunities, and two, they just get discouraged because they're not giving as many opportunities. And then when they get those opportunities, they're held to such a high standard. It's much more stressful. It's much more pressure, so they give up. And so it's, yeah.
In addition to being held to that higher standard, I think that part of it is that we have to be able to say, you have to recognize those mistakes, and you have to be able to say, yes, that was a mistake, I've
Mm,
learned from it, and now I'm going to move on, as opposed to, no, 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 I was right and they were wrong.
sure.
You know, and there's a difference in mindset of those. Like, you really have to be able to recognize, all right, well, I messed that up, all right, well, this is the lesson that I've learned, and now I won't do that next time, as opposed to the, I'm right and they were wrong
Hmm.
mindset.
Yeah, yeah, that posturing.
Yeah.
Hmm. So I really like to talk about failure. Because I think I don't think we talk about failure enough. It's so easy to look at Tony winners and to look at, award winners and all these things. But then especially for younger people, there's a lot of failure that comes before these huge success stories. And so, as you have gone along in your career, I'm gonna take some liberties and assume that you've had some failures.
Oh
How
yeah.
have how have you bounced back from those and kept going?
Frankly, a lot of that like reflection has happened in the last year and a half. And that sounds kind of, I don't want that to sound pompous in that like, oh, I didn't have to reflect until the last year and a half, but I truly think that the pandemic has really given us that space to rest and reflect. And I think that it has really allowed me to like look back at my career and pinpoint, feel like, oh yeah, that was a thing I shouldn't have done. All right, well, next time I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do, you know what I mean? And I feel like I have a new appreciation for, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier of like what shows you're going to take and like going 125% on 5 things. And I feel like now that I have the time, I can look back and be like, oh, right, I shouldn't have done all 5 of those shows. I should have done 4 of them because on that 5th one, I made this mistake. And it's because I was tired, or it's because this, that, or the other, you know? Remembering that we are human and that we do have to rest is really what has been the thing that I've learned. And I think one of the biggest mistakes I made early on in my career was I have to be outgoing and social all the time because I didn't realize how much of an introvert I am until I probably was like 28, 29, which was a little bit too late. um, because I was the person that was like, "Great, where are we going for dinner? I have these 5 options." Da 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 da. Oh well, what are we? Are we going to do breakfast? What are we going to do on our day off? What are we? Like I was that person, and I didn't realize how much that was stressing me out until I like had a big break in it was 2017. I came off a series of a lot of big shows, and I finally just hit a point where I was exhausted, and I just was like, I can't even fathom going back to work because I'm exhausted and I just don't want to anymore. And that was really when I realized, oh, it's because you're doing too much. And it was just like I took a few weeks off and I totally reevaluated where I was and what I was doing and what I wanted to be doing and the type of things that I wanted to be working on. And it was like, oh, I just need to rest more. And I need to be a little bit more careful about saying yes to everything because that's what makes you tired. And then you burn out.
Yeah, that's such a common theme that I hear people talk about is just how to juggle like a freelance life and how to, do projects that you're proud of, but also pay rent. And also, yeah,
Yeah.
it's such a hard, it's kind of like there's not like at least I don't feel there's like a formula for it. It's like an ongoing thing that you never quite figure out, but have to like keep striving for.
Yeah. Being a freelancer is fucking hard. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I can swear, but
You sure can.
great. Being a freelancer is fucking hard. Living in New York is really fucking hard. And that is the thing that I tell students that are talking about moving to New York is like, New York is amazing. I love it here, but it's fucking hard. And your first 2 years expect to have 50 billion jobs and they're all going to overlap and it's going to suck, but that's okay because you'll get there. And if that means that you're waiting tables or working at a Starbucks or working at a bank or doing any other form of day job, that's okay. That's totally fine because you'll get to do a couple things on the side and then you'll meet some people. And then the next time they have a thing, they'll say, oh, hey, remember that thing we did? Let's do this other thing. Like some of my very best friends and core collaborators are 2 people that I met literally my second weekend of living in New York City. I happened to be at a party that got rained out, so we all ran inside because there was a huge thunderstorm, and I was literally like huddled on a couch and was just sitting with someone, and they're like, "Oh, hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm a sound designer," and they're like, "Oh, cool, I'm a stage manager. This is so and so who's a director." they're looking for a sound designer. Do you want to come? It's like,
What?
sure. Literally, that's how I like met these people. And from that, I met other people. And then it was just like, it snowballed from there. Because I was at a party and it got rained out. So like pure happenstance, but still some of my best friends out of that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's definitely luck involved in
Oh,
some.
entirely.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So I like to ask everyone one final question. And it used to be advice for young people, but I've since changed it up. And I like to ask, what are you excited about right now?
I'm excited about seeing people again. And I'm really excited that like we have the opportunity to be in a room again. I I feel like I said it earlier, but like the reason that I love my job is the people and being able to like talk to one another and tell stories. I'm really excited to be able to like have a problem and solve it with other humans in a room and not just like back and forth via email or over Zoom, but like talk in a room. And that sounds so silly, but it's true.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Carly Wagner.